Excerpt from the 727th Official Contact Meeting on November 22, 2019, translated with deepl.com. The following is an unauthorized, unofficial translation.
I remember that Sfath made the remark that the earthly astronomers were justers and would neither judge things correctly nor use proper names. This was also the case with the terrestrial zoologists, who would not understand by far that the whole nature-wide living world could not simply be called animal world, because the term animal only refers to mammalian beings. Resp. Mammals, other living beings of other genera and species, however, would correspond in every respect to completely different taxonomies or orders, so that not all living beings could be called animals. He specified the world of living beings in different organized units, such as specifically in birds, poultry, lizards, reptiles, beetles, worms, fish, bees, hornets, snakes, spiders, butterflies, etc. Actually, he called those living beings which have a metabolism and are capable of reproduction, growth and evolution, but also react to influences or stimuli from the environment, as well as to internal and external stimuli of the body, to which the life forms react with certain reactions. And if I still bring together his main enumeration, then he named in this connection the especially organized units as follows.
1. Animal world. Mammals are vertebrates, throw or give birth to living descendants, which are suckled by the mother for food intake, like for example, elephants, monkeys, hoofed animals, predators, marsupials, hares, rodents, bats. Resp. Fluttering animals like bats, which occur in specific and adapted areas of the world. So the smooth-nose freetails, bulldog bats, smooth noses, flying foxes, leaf noses, as well as some types of horseshoe noses and the almost worldwide spread mouse ears. Animals usually have hair, with few exceptions, actually only the rodent-necked mull, that belongs into the subordination porcupine relatives, a sandgrave, and in constructions in the semi-deserts of East Africa is given a home, particularly in the south of Ethiopia, as well as in Kenya and Somalia, and usually has 4 legs for locomotion. Only few mammal living beings have 2 legs and are so-called bipedal BZW, Swibina, like Z. B. Certain monkey types and kangaroos.
2. Birds and poultry equals land and water fowl. These are vertebrates, which have a beak and a plumage, lay eggs, incubate them, in order to produce offspring, which already after hatching take up food absolutely independently by pecking, beaking and feed themselves. Big birds and certain poultry, as for example the present-day chickens, began to develop in first types and types to new life forms, namely as a result of a world climate disaster. 2 million years ago, an atmospheric fire or a tremendous atmospheric explosion occurred, as could be determined by time travel. The result was that a porous giant meteor penetrated into the Earth's shell and exploded high in the atmosphere. On the one hand, an enormous heat was generated and much of the Earth's surface was burned away, while on the other hand an enormous mass of asteroid dust changed the climate worldwide and affected many forms of life of all kinds, after which the climate changed several times during 34 million years. 8 million years ago, the entire world of life forms began to transform itself again over time, as was the case during the previous period due to climate change. Many early and very large life forms fell victim to this change, as some time travels back in time and corresponding observations have shown. For example, the large dinosaurs also became extinct over a period of several million years, although some species continued to exist for a very long time, including in all areas of today's northern and southern Europe, down to Arabia and Africa, as well as from North to South America. Their diverse offspring gradually adapted to the new climatic conditions, changed, became smaller over millions of years, as did the entire vegetation, and adapted to the new climatic and ecological conditions, like the new life forms resulting from the changes. According to Sfath, the chickens of today, for example, developed from descendants of the reptile Tyrannosaurus rex. According to Sfath, however, the whole of this global process had nothing to do with the asteroid crash about 66.4 million years ago near today's northern Mexican peninsula Yucatan in Central America, from which a small part was torn away. As far as I know, this is not known to geologists, who assume that the meteor only crashed into the sea. The crashed giant asteroid probably caused a giant crater of almost 200 kilometers in diameter. This is now called Chicxulub crater, but the destruction catastrophe directly resulting from the crash did not spread over the whole Earth, as false earthly geological and paleontological assertions etc. have shown for a long time. In truth, the direct area of destruction was just over 1,800 kilometers wide, and in this direct area it happened that all life was completely wiped out and exterminated, including all the various dinosaurs living there, which, by the way, had habitats as far down as South America, as well as in the present areas of Africa, Arabia and the old northern regions of the Earth. As Sfath explained, the geological, paleontological and biological fantasies that the crash would lead to a worldwide extinction of all large and largest living beings, such as dinosaurs etc., are absolute nonsense, because only the direct area of influence of 1,800 kilometers was affected in this way. While outside of this area the giant meteor impact probably caused very heavy damages, destruction, extermination and the death of living beings, but depending on the distance from the source of impact, everything steadily decreased in strength. Subsequently, only a gigantic tsunami swept across the Atlantic, because a large part of the comet had not fallen on land but into the sea. But the areas in the east, which exists today as Europe and Eurasia, were only affected by weak impacts and thus hardly or not at all destruction, annihilation and extinction of life forms took place, as well as not across the Pacific Ocean to Asia and the rest of the Earth. The gigantic asteroid impact of 66.4 million years ago near Yucatan affected practically only the ecosystems in Central America horrendously catastrophically, while North America and South America as a whole were more or less affected, because the further away from the place of the crash, the more the whole thing weakened. And the huge amounts of dust that were supposedly thrown into the Earth's atmosphere by the crash, as our clever researchers claim, Sfath said that only little dust was produced by the small piece of land that was affected by the crash of the meteor, because most of it fell into the sea. Thus also the sun did not darken itself over longer time, as also the temperatures did not sink rapidly and over longer time. But what happened, as Sfath explained, was that enormous masses of water, which as tsunamis raced hundreds of kilometers inland, spread and flooded everything, as well as enormous masses of water were thrown high into the atmosphere and caused disastrous precipitation. A worldwide dramatic decline in species, as is claimed, is also not true, but only fantasy hypotheses, because such an event occurred only on the entire North and South American continent affected by the meteor impact, because the impact had very little or no influence on all other areas of the Earth, neither on the ecosystems nor on the geological structures, and consequently no geological changes occurred. Since only North and South America were affected by the meteor impact, the rest of the Earth was not affected, so that neither animals nor the rest of the flora and fauna were directly affected. The development of the really large variety of species on Earth, which I have already mentioned, began decisively already 2 million years ago, when an atmospheric fire started a climate change that lasted 34 million years. During this time, all life continued unstoppably, and consequently all life forms of all genera and species developed in a completely natural way. Then began, as said, 8 million years ago by another natural event, the actual very large transformation process in relation to all existing life forms of all kinds. From this, the first creature from many transformations emerged, which for the first time had developed 5 toes on each foot and 5 fingers on each hand, which also ran alternately on all 4 limbs or only on the 2 hind legs, and from which the creature man emerged 12 million years ago. In the Messel pit in Germany, these creatures were shown to me by Sfath as a fossil, for which I found a photo at Wikipedia, which I will copy and paste at my current station. Of course, I'm absolutely clear that the whole earthly paleontological science will deny everything, that out of this creature finally the man of the earth developed. Consequently, it is also claimed that another living being developed out of it. But I don't care, because I am relying on what Sfath explained when he took me to the Messel pit, showed me the fossil and explained that he had personally checked everything to the last detail and therefore knew without a doubt that the man of the earth had evolved from these beings.
3. Amphibians. Ambians equals frogs, amphibians and caudal amphibians. These are warm and changeable double living respectively on the land as well as in the water living agricultural vertebrates respectively, reptiles like toads, frogs, newts, toads and salamanders. Most of them are nocturnal and thus protect themselves from predators. Amphibians generally reproduce individually, developing by laying eggs in the water in the form of spawn, from which gill-breathing larvae hatch, which feed themselves. These larvae normally transform through a metamorphosis into a lung-breathing adult individual, which can then live outside of water. The physiology, or rather the processes and functions of the whole organism of all amphibian species are designed to keep water loss on the skin to a minimum and are therefore bound to habitats with high humidity.
4. Reptiles are change-warm vertebrates, which move crawling or continuously, whereby also the dinosaurs, which became extinct about 65 million years ago, belong to the class of reptiles according to Sfath's explanations. The very first creatures of this kind, contrary to the assertions of earthly paleontologists and dinosaur researchers, did not only colonize the Earth in their first forms 315 million years ago, but already 467 million years ago, as unique fossilized finds of him prove. All reptiles have 4 legs, as was also the case with the reptile Tyrannosaurus rex, which, however, ran on only 2 hind legs, because the 2 front legs were stunted, small, short and unfit to run. Various reptiles lay lime-shell-coated waterproof eggs. Others however throw or expel their offspring alive, which immediately feeds itself, like sea snakes etc. According to Sfath, reptiles have developed partly from early amphibians, others, however, from various early pterosaurs. Therefore also in this respect the assumptions of the earthly paleontologists do not agree with the statements of Sfath, and this is also the case with regard to the paleontological data.
5. Insects. Kerf are arthropods and usually winged small creatures, whose bodies are mostly clearly divided into head, breast and abdomen, which in their adult form have an outer shell of chitin and 6 legs and are therefore hexapods, which usually have 2 pairs of wings. Insects resp. Kerfs are the most species-rich class of the arthropods,
as they were also the absolute species richest majority and class of all living beings at all. According to Sfath, they comprise several million different genera and species on Earth. With the insects, it doesn't concern, as already explained, animals. Because animals are mammal living in and alone, if all genera and species of insects and everything that is self-moving as a whole is considered in relation to other small and smallest living beings, then, according to Sfath, more than 75% of all the aforementioned and as yet unnamed life forms, there are very many millions of genera and species, of which millions are still undiscovered, are insects. Fossils of insects and other living beings can be found, which lived already more than 400 million years ago when the Earth reached heaven. The females of some insect species can only mate on a single day in their lives, but they do so with as many males as possible and hoard their sperm in a so-called sperm bank, with which they then fertilize their eggs for the rest of their lives. However, this strategy leads to an evolutionary conflict between the males, because they fight warlike to enforce their own sperm. For the females, however, it is advantageous if as many of their eggs as possible are fertilized by many males, because only then their genetic material is passed on to many offspring.
6.
Unnamed life forms, which correspond neither to the aforementioned animals, the beasts, birds, reptiles, poultry, amphibians nor insects, but are each for itself own genera and species, like e.g., the following praying mantis, spiders, beetles, dragonflies, butterflies, bees, wasps, hornets, grasshoppers, worms, snails, scorpions, vermin as well as wood wasps etc., etc. The reproduction of these creatures takes place, as with insects, usually also over egg deposits, that often are stuck together somewhere or are deposited in the ground. And as with insects, the eggs of the females are fertilized by mating for the descendants, with what there can be, as with insects, also competition fights, like z.b. with ants and bees,